Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's Run of the Week, and the Eagles have a new coach as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 304. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Greg Cosell to talk about the new hire. As the Eagles have made it official, Nick Sirianni has been hired to be the new head coach here in Philadelphia. Sirianni was previously the offensive coordinator in Indianapolis under former Eagles coach Frank Reich. He worked with Reich out in San Diego for the Chargers as well. Before that, he was with the Kansas City Chiefs as an assistant. We'll get into the background, but the crux of this conversation with Greg will be all about what the identity was of this Colts offense, as what it looked like with Sirianni as the offensive coordinator. How did they create some favorable matchups? What does the run game look like? We'll cover it all and more with Mr. Greg Cosell. Before we get there, though, just want to quickly remind you to jump onto Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment, whether it's a question you want answered here on the show, an idea for a segment you want, really anything, especially with the new coach and the new coaching staff. I'm sure you all have a lot on your mind. Head over there, leave it in the comment section. That's the number one way for it to end up here on the show. Appreciate those that have done so recently. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention as well the Journey to the Draft podcast. Not only are we going to be going twice weekly here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky, but we're going to go twice weekly over on the Journey to the Draft as well throughout the offseason. And next week, with it being the week of the Senior Bowl, we will be daily, Monday through Friday. Next week, breaking down the action, talking about all the best players. We've got exclusive interviews, a ton to cover. So make sure you go and subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast wherever podcasts can be found. All right, that being said, let's get this show started. It's time to dive into our show right now in Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, here to help introduce us to the new scheme that will be here in Philadelphia under new head coach Nick Sirianni is our friend Greg Cosell from NFL Films. Greg, welcome back to the show, my friend. Excited to dig into what this new look offense could look like here in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, Nick Sirianni's 39 years old. His experience is he started with the Chiefs, but he's been with the Chargers for a good chunk of the last number of years. And then obviously he moved with Frank Reich. Well, he wasn't in Philly, obviously, but he moved to Indianapolis. He knew Frank from the Chargers. So a younger guy, obviously younger guys, based on their background, they coach kind of what they know. So he kind of knows, I think, the offense that we saw in Indianapolis and the offense that he knows from being with the Chargers. So it'll be interesting to see. I tell you what really struck me watching Indianapolis's offense this year, Fran, and I'm sure this is what Eagles fans would like to know, is clearly they had drafted Jonathan Taylor in the second round. And when you draft a back like Jonathan Taylor, who's a volume back, that's the kind of runner he is. You and I agreed we like Taylor coming out of Wisconsin. He's a certain kind of back. And it took him a little while to kind of get his feet wet in the NFL. But over the last 6-7 weeks of the season and through the playoff, made Taylor in some ways the foundation of their offense in Indianapolis. And I don't know if they did that simply because it fit Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers is obviously not a second reaction quarterback. And at this point in his career, he needed a run game. Or whether Nick Sirianni believes that, hey, I want to start my offense with a run game behind a really good offensive line. I guess we're going to find that out because clearly that's what Indianapolis was down the stretch when they played some really good offensive football.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. Anytime you're talking about an offensive coach, and we did this back in 2016 when the Eagles hired Doug Peterson, all right, we're going to try and get a semblance of what is the scheme going to look like? Because, Nick Sirianni has never had an offense where he was the guy, right? You had Frank Reich there, obviously calling plays. Sirianni had a huge part in constructing that scheme and putting the weekly game plan together. But I think it'll be really interesting just to get a sense of, what this offense will look like. When you look, especially over the last 3 years, you mentioned what it looked like this year with Phillip Rivers, but you go back to last year, Jacoby Brissett, the majority of the starting reps there in Indianapolis. The year before, Andrew Luck, they've had to kind of change what they were going to do and what they were going to be philosophically over those 3 years. So even with that, you weren't able to get a sense of really what that identity was. I'm excited to get to see what it'll look like here this fall.
Well, it's a great point because obviously in with the Chargers and this year in Indy, they had Phillip Rivers, who's a specific kind of player. We know Phillip Rivers is a pocket quarterback, as tough as they come, obviously just retired. And so your offense has to be structured a certain way because Phillip Rivers, and I thought he was great, but he played a certain way. Then you talk about Andrew Luck in 2018, and Andrew Luck obviously could play very strong and firm from the pocket, but he also had second reaction movement ability. Then they played with Jacoby Brissett, who in a sense was like Andrew Luck, not as good, but he could play from the pocket and he could move. So now as Nick Sirianni comes to Philadelphia and the quarterback room right now has Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts, it'll be interesting to see, number one, how the quarterback plays out. We don't know that yet as we speak at this time of year, but you clearly have two quarterbacks with movement ability. And so how do you structure your offense and your pass game with two quarterbacks that have movement ability?
Yeah, I mean, this is an offense, and I'd love to just kind of get your thoughts just on the pass game in general and some of the things you saw from them philosophically, conceptually. Eagles fans can remember back to what the offense looked like, when Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator here in Philadelphia. Obviously, there were a lot of people that had an impact on that offense, but you saw a lot of plays. I thought anytime I watched the Colts on film, you saw a lot of those same things that we saw in Philadelphia here in 17 and 16 there in Indianapolis with Frank Reich.
Oh, no. I mean, it's funny. You talk about Dagger. Dagger was a concept that the Colts ran a lot. And obviously it's a really good concept, but it was really good for Phillip Rivers as well. So, that's a concept you will see. We know that was in the Eagles playbook under Doug Peterson. You saw a lot of high-low concepts, a lot of, three-man route concepts that had a high-low element to it. So I think you'll see a lot of those same concepts as sort of foundational things. A lot of these concepts, what you're trying to do, and again, when you're playing against man coverage, it's totally different. So when we talk about concepts now, I'm speaking more about zone concepts. What you're trying to do by the nature of your concepts is define the throw for the quarterback. A high-low defines a throw for a quarterback based on the reaction of a defender. A flood concept, a three-level stretch concept, that defines a throw for a quarterback based on the reaction of the defense. I think you'll see those kinds of things. We saw a lot of those in Indianapolis.
When you look at I've gone back and I've watched a lot of the content that the Colts have put out with Coach Sirianni, over the years. And it's kind of interesting just to kind of hear him talk and hear him discuss kind of his philosophy offensively. And one of the things he has talked about is just finding ways to create matchups. And I know watching the Colts over the years, one of the things I've been impressed with is their ability, you will call it formation variation and receiver distribution,
right.
Using a lot of those terms. Can you just kind of break it down to brass tacks for us? Explain it to us like we're five. What does that mean? What do you, when a coach talks about those kinds of situations, what does that look like for the viewer?
Well, first of all, they were very multiple. The Colts were. Let's just deal with the Colts this year, because we're not going to go back years and years here. The Colts were very multiple with their personnel, and they were very multiple with their formation. So when you talk about formations, what that means is it's the number of receivers to one side and then the number of receivers to the other side. That's called the distribution of receivers. So let's say it's a 2-by-2 set. The distribution is 2 receivers to each side. If it's a 3-by-1 set, it's 1 receiver to one side and 3 receivers to the other side. Then you get into the specific location of receivers, which is dependent on the personnel grouping. So in other words, you can have a 3-by-1 set in which all 3 receivers to one side are wide receivers. You can also have, let's say, a personnel grouping in which you line up in 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, in which you could have 2 tight ends to the side of the 3 wide receivers. So it all depends on what your personnel grouping is versus your receiver distribution. And they were very multiple and very diverse in that area. And you want to be that way because that changes how the defense, even if they're in base zone concepts, it changes how they play defensively, even in base zone concepts like cover 3 or cover 4, because it just depends who those receivers are. corners or safeties might play with totally different eye discipline and leverage concepts depending on who the receivers are. So you want to do that as an offense. You want to change up your distribution, and then you want to change up your location within that distribution.
So you're always kind of keeping the defense guessing. You're moving pieces around, and you're trying to create some of those one-on-one matchups, right? So you're trying to essentially get your playmakers the ball in space. And really the big thing, and a lot of coaches say this, is trying to lean into the strengths of your best players. Figure out what they do well, and then how do we put them in best position to utilize those strengths. So if a guy's a great yards after catch weapon, hey, let's get him the ball. Find ways to be able to get him the ball fast, so now he can create and do what he does best. Hey, this guy's a great above the rim receiver. Let's try and create situations where he can go up and win above the rim. And by doing all these different things formationally, now you're trying to get those guys in position to do all the things that we're talking about.
Like here, let's just think of this in terms of the Colts and the Eagles.
Sure.
The Colts had T.Y. Hilton, okay?
Yep.
The Eagles have Jalen Reagor. So with T.Y. Hilton, let's say you line up in a 3-by-1 set. You put T.Y. Hilton in the inside slot to trips, meaning he's the closest to the formation, okay? On the trip side, the 3-receiver side. So, look, from there, he can run, let's say, what we call an over route or kind of an angled crosser across the field. Hey, if it's man coverage, you're hoping his speed, he runs away from the player covering him. If it's zone, you're putting an underneath zone defender in stress a little bit, because in most zones, certainly in cover 3, that underneath defender would have to turn and run with him. So now think of Jalen Reagor in that spot, in the inside slot to trips, being in a position where, hey, he can run away from man coverage, or he can take an underneath defender in zone who's more often than not a linebacker, and that guy then is in a tough spot dealing with the speed of a Jalen Reagor. So things of that nature, you're trying to create those opportunities for your players.
And that essentially also, when you're doing that, you're making things a little bit more well-defined for the quarterback as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is really what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Basically, you build your pass game, and everybody has concepts. We know that. We know that every coach has concepts. But you're basically trying to build your pass game around maximizing the talents and strengths of your quarterback and minimizing what in your mind he does not do well. So that's what you try to do with everything that's involved in the pass game. Personnel, formation, route concepts, all those things factor in to how you build a pass game, but it plays to what your quarterback can do well and what you believe he can't do well.
I'm interested in looking too, just at the Colts receiving core and getting a sense of, all right, who are the guys that kind of if you're trying to make those comparisons. You talked about, comparing T.Y. Hilton to a Jalen Reagor. Who are the guys that, when you look at that depth chart, and for an Eagles fan that's going to go and try and see if I want to watch the Colts offense and try and see if I can picture what these other guys can do. And the other part of this too, I look at Nyheim Hines, and a guy that they were able to feature in the passing game, a lot of different concepts to get him out in space, use him at all 3 levels of the field. I feel like with Miles Sanders, that's something you'll certainly be able to see if you're trying to make some of those comparisons from a skill set standpoint as well.
Yeah, I think Sanders can do those things. Depending on whether Boston Scott's here, he might be able to do some of that as well. So yeah, there's opportunities there. The big question is, how does Nick see Miles Sanders as a runner?
Right.
Because you and Miles on, and we both agree that as this season progressed, he ran really hard, but he did have some durability issues this season. So the question is, does Nick Sirianni come in here and see Miles Sanders as somewhat similar to Jonathan Taylor in the fact that, hey, Miles Sanders is our 18 to 22 carry a game back? We don't know the answer to that. Sanders has not done that at the NFL level, and you'd like to think he can. He certainly ran with the toughness that's required to do that. But the question is, can he hold up from a durability standpoint?
The last question I have for you, Greg, just looking at Nick Sirianni and just his background, he has worked with quarterbacks. So there's been a lot written about just the impact he's had on Phillip Rivers in the past, but then also with wide receivers as well. And we talked about some of the guys that he's worked with in Indianapolis, whether it's T.Y. Hilton over the last couple of years, Michael Pittman this year. Yeah, what he's done with Zach, even Zach Pascal. I was really impressed watching Pascal this past season as a big possession threat that had that ability to create some separation. going back to his days with the Chargers, one young player out there who really blossomed under his tutelage was Keenan Allen, who has turned into one of the best receivers in the game. Can you just talk about what you've seen just from Keenan Allen in general, just so that fans can obviously a lot goes into Keenan Allen, his own, the work that he's put in and his skill set, but what you've seen from Keenan Allen from a pure, technique standpoint over the course of his career.
Well, also keep in mind, Tyrell Williams had his best year of his career.
Good point too.
Under Nick Sirianni.
Yeah.
But Keenan Allen came into the NFL, and I remember doing him coming out of college, as I'm sure you do. He was pretty refined coming out.
Yep.
Now, obviously, he's known as a great work ethic guy, incredibly smart. But Keenan Allen is as refined and nuanced a route runner as there is in the league. You wouldn't call him purely explosive, but he has a great feel for understanding leverage of defenders. He works the middle of the field really effectively. He's not necessarily going to run by people, but he has a great feel in man coverage for understanding how to create separation. He's got very good route quickness, not speed, vertical speed,
right, but
very good route and separation quickness. So he's a more of a top tier receiver. I don't know if we could look at, could someone like, and again, we know that this guy had a great 4 or 5 game stretch and then kind of faded. And I don't know anything about his work ethic, but could someone like Travis Fulgham fall into that category, as someone who could fit that role, assuming that his work ethic is where we would all like it to be, because he's got good size. Keenan Allen has good size. Does someone like Travis Fulgham blossom under a Nick Sirianni? That remains to be seen. I'm sure, the Eagles would love to see something like that happen. So we'll see. But, you made the point about Zach Pascal. Zach Pascal, in the minds of most, is a journeyman type receiver. But when you watch his tape, he's a good route runner. He gets open. He understands voids and zones. He had a good feel running routes against man. Guys like that, you love to see that because, not everybody has top 5 receiving talent in the NFL.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in that you're trying to find ways to leverage guys' strengths. You're trying to put guys in best, take it. Oh, this is what this guy does well. How do I find ways to get the most out of that skill set? And I guess just parting thoughts, really a good picture just for the quarterback position in general, right? When you're talking about a scheme like that, because of what we're talking about and trying to find ways to utilize all these skill players, Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts, you really like the idea of working with a guy like Coach Nick Sirianni.
Without question. And, and the good thing is, look, as we stand right now, we have Wentz and we have Hurts. So we're going to have an interesting quarterback room, which is a good thing. You want competition. You want guys feel like every day matters and that no one's safe. And you're dealing with 2 guys that do have mobility, both by design and outside the pocket. So, it does present a lot of good things for Nick Sirianni as he kind of looks at this offensive group and sees what he can do to stress and pressure defenses. So, obviously most people, and I know the Eagles have thought this way for years, that they believe it's an offensive league, which I think the numbers bear out, and that, they hired an offensive coach and they feel like they've got burgeoning talent throughout their roster on the offensive side of the ball with some young players, with the Jalen Reagors of the world, the Miles Sanders of the world, Dallas Goedert, when we were talking about the Colts offense, I didn't emphasize this point, but it's worth emphasizing. They played an awful lot with multiple tight end sets, Fran.
Yeah,
so, that's something we could easily see here. I'm sure you, since he was announced, I'm sure you've taken a look at this offense. They play a lot with multiple tight ends.
Yeah. Again, it all gleans into trying to create those favorable matchups in the passing game, something you and I will be talking a lot about, not just this offseason, but certainly once we get into the fall. So it seems a long way away, but it'll be here before we know it. Greg, thanks so much for joining us to talk about new Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, Fran.
Special thanks to Greg Cosell and all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here on Eagles Entertainment. All that being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the Duffy House, I'm Fran Duffy. We'll talk to you next week.
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Pattison wine collection created in partnership with Wink, featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Pattison wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring the sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at philadelphiaeagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad and Pattison delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.